It's pulpy, it's comic booky, it's filled with action, it's dramatic. Yeah, these guys stuck their landing. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, Cobra Kai has finally come to an end. The 6-season TV show has gone through its 15 episodes in season 6 that has closed it out. And we are here today to talk about the final 5 with the showrunners, Josh Heald, Jon Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg. And yes, they really did stick the landing. Nobody was sure how they were going to end this. I mean, like, there's been so many great episodes, and the question is, how do you bring it all to an end? And they did so by introducing both new elements and returning to the origins of the show and the origins of the Karate Kid movies themselves. And they really wrapped things up perfectly, in my opinion, which is why it was so much fun to interview them. And you know, I've been thinking about it a lot, and when it comes down to it, like, as I say later in the episode, Karate Kid had a big influence on me as a kid. I joined a dojo because of it. And one of the strengths of this final season of Cobra Kai really examines the student-sensei relationship and the impact these teachers have on their students, both good and bad, as you see the dark senseis and the good senseis as well. And I was inspired to hop on my bike after seeing Karate Kid, and I went to a little strip mall back in Kansas City called Ranch Mart, and I joined Bushudikan Karate, and it was awesome. My sensei was a man named Jim Hartley. He had a commanding presence. He talked about the philosophies of Bushudikan Karate, and he was a great teacher as well that really, I cannot stress this enough, inspired his students. I also learned a little bit of judo while I was there from Steve Kinzer, who was another great sensei. And, you know, now so many years later, of course, Jim Hartley has retired, but Travis Boggs, who took over this academy from his father, has turned it into Kenyukan Academy in Kansas City, and it's still running. It's been like a 50-year institution in Kansas City, and Steve is also still teaching judo there as well. And so, you know, I just want to do a shout out to the senseis who really inspired me, Jim and Steve, and of course, huge kudos to Travis for keeping Kenyukan Academy going with this legacy of over 50 years. But back to the storytelling and screenwriting, of course, Josh, Jon, and Hayden did such an amazing job in this podcast of discussing their creative process for wrapping up Cobra Kai and bringing it all home, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine. We will turn 13 this summer, and we couldn't have done it without you. We recently published our Oscars issue. We're still adding new articles to it, so there's a reason to keep reading us, yes, after the Oscars, but of course you could read all the screenplays in our magazine of the nominees and of the contenders and of course of the winners themselves. If you've never read us before, the best way to read us is on a desktop or laptop at backstory.net, or of course my favorite way is through the Backstory app on an iPad. And the good news is we have a free issue so you could test drive us, and if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, folks. You could see us doing this interview through Zoom on the Backstory Magazine YouTube page. It would really mean a lot to me to have all of you join us as a subscriber. So thanks for considering. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with Cobra Kai showrunners Josh Heald, Jon Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg as they break down the finale of their Netflix show, Cobra Kai Season 6, the last 5 episodes. Okay, you guys, it's good to see you all. How's it going?
Very good.
Excellent.
Good to see you.
Your show is wrapped. Congrats. You really stuck the landing. You know, I guess the first question, and it surprises me that I didn't ask this one earlier, but I think my first question would be, have any of you ever been in a fight before in real life?
I can't think of an actual real fight. I mean, Josh, that one moment in college that I had there, that was not a real fight. That was like a little...
I can think of one moment where Jon was kind of almost in a fight. There was a moment in high school or in middle school where I was almost in a fight, but I can't think of, I don't know, I can't speak for Hayden, but I can't think of anything where I've ever been like hit in such a way or have hit somebody in such a way that felt like I could call it a fight.
I've been in like sudden, like, I feel like in a gym class, like something happens and like someone's hitting at me and I'm trying to defend myself and then like swinging and it gets broken up, but not like the we're meeting after school or like, you know, nothing that has the wind up that like Miguel and Daniel have been through.
That's fascinating. I mean, I was driving around when I was thinking about my questions, and I always loved the movie Karate Kid. It was always something that I think really inspired me. And I was realizing that it had more of a profound influence on me than I was aware of, because I was in part of the OG generation. You know, in 1984, I saw it in theaters and I was in middle school. And as a Jewish kid in Kansas, I was starting to be bullied. And I decided that it was either that summer that the movie came out or that fall, I started taking karate at like a little strip mall called Bashudikan Karate in Kansas, in Ranch Mart, a little strip mall. And I got to say, like, we had a really good sensei, which is what so much of your show is about. And, you know, his first rule was avoid a fight. He's like, all of you can run. You don't need to learn anything. Like, there's no reason to fight. But he's like, if you can't avoid a fight, he's going to teach strategy. And then the final rule was, if any of us were using what we were taught to bully other people or to do bad things, he would come kick our ass. And it saved my ass. I mean, like, I won a couple fights in school that I did not start. They were starting to also blend some judo, and I made the football team after, like, literally a kid said, well, Jews can't play football, so I know you won't be showing up for football tryouts today. And I was like, sure they can, man. And I showed up. I actually made the team, barely even knowing all the rules. Like, somebody got cut from the team because of me. That was, again, karate. But the weirdest thing was, I think I only took it 2 or 3 years. And it was something that I realized stayed with me the rest of my life. 2 years ago, a crazy road rage person, like, followed me when I was picking up some takeout and would not back down. They were just a lunatic. And I tried to avoid the fight for like 10 minutes. And finally they threw a punch at me. And like, I have not been in a fight in many years. Like, I probably like not since my 20s or 30s, when random people at bars would just start fights. And like, it came back to me. Like, strangely, it's not like, you know, I'm not like the most in shape guy. And like, I was able to defend myself and put this guy down so that he did not get back up and the fight was over, like, without a ref. Yeah, it was crazy. Like, so I realized that Karate Kid really had an influence on my life, and having a good sensei is a really key part of the show. And I think that's a good place to start, because what you did, especially in this last stretch, was you focused on the legacy of a good sensei and how it could impact you both for not fighting, which is kind of the way that Miyagi-Do goes to an extent, or at least for Sam, and for fighting. And by the way, we're going to get into the spoilers just right now. So sure. Spoiler alert, kids, this is the final 5 episodes of Cobra Kai. So if you have not yet seen them, they're on Netflix. Please press pause, go watch them, and come back. But let's talk about senseis and how they could really influence kids, because for each of them, their time passes to a new generation. And that is what these final 5 I thought were especially about.
Well, the reason that we're even here talking about this all these years later was because in 1984, we met the greatest sensei that we all wanted to be our sensei. Mr. Miyagi is the greatest character in the Miyagi verse when it comes down to it. I think he was teaching all of us, in a sense, about an approach to life that was really strong. And then also in that movie, we met Sensei Kreese, who felt like the worst person that you'd want to have teaching you, or teaching your children, I would say, because, you know, especially with how he reacted to his student losing and how he treated Johnny in the aftermath of that. This is not a good dude. And from the beginning of making our show, we wanted to explore deeply into the philosophies behind both of these two men and the approach that they brought. We wanted to humanize the senseis themselves, you know, in terms of Sensei Kreese in particular, who's, you know, Martin Kove was thankfully able to act on our show to really see, how did Sensei Kreese become Sensei Kreese? Was he just born a monster, or did he have himself a bad teacher who infused this into him? And through our show, we have Johnny Lawrence who becomes our hero. He's a bit of an anti-hero because he was the bully from the Karate Kid who we all hated when we were young, but we start to feel for him in the early moments of our show and root for him to get his mojo back. We don't want to see him the loser that he was. We want to see him, back in Cobra Kai and back on top is kind of what our knee-jerk reaction to is, because that's what we saw in our youth. It's this memory that we all have of him. Even though we didn't like him, we liked that we didn't like him, and we didn't like that. So we want to see him grow over the course of the show. So he has this philosophy at the start of the show that he's just teaching what Kreese taught because that's all he knows. And then it's about him going through a journey of realizing, okay, I learned some really good things, but I also learned some bad things in here. And is there a way for me to become the best version of a Cobra Kai sensei? And for Daniel, it's he had the best sensei of all time. Could I ever live up to him? Will I ever be that man? And then in this final season, having to wrestle with, was he that man exactly? Was he everything that I thought he was? Or was there more to it? And have him go through that whole journey to come out the other side and realize, A, he was that man. But more importantly, the messages that he was teaching of the same thing that your sensei was teaching is like, you shouldn't be in a fight. The goal is to not be in a fight. You don't want to be in a fight. But if you have to be in a fight, you need to be able to defend yourself. And that was sort of the point of Miyagi-Do. And the final episodes were Miyagi-Do being Miyagi-Do, Cobra Kai being the best version of Cobra Kai that it can be, and having the right men there who, without the journey of our series, may not have been equipped to be the best representations of those fighting philosophies. But by episode 65, they both are.
That's a great way to look at it. This is really funny, but the great publicist Amy Zach got me into the premiere that was happening for these final episodes at the Egyptian Theater. And it was with a packed house, and, many of the stars were there, if not all. And it was an absolute blast. But the funniest thing that happened was you got up in front of the crowd because you were actually not showing the episodes in order. There was a finite amount of time. You weren't showing all of them. And you're just like, hey, we're starting with episode 3 and 4. That's what you guys are going to watch tonight. And you could go see the absolute finale, episode 5, which drops at midnight. And you talked people through what happened in the first 2 episodes. You're like, hey, look, so Johnny and Carmen, they had their baby. Everything's fine. Everybody's training and dealing with the repercussions. And that's it. That's all you need to know, kids. Let's just get right into it. And everybody was laughing. It was really funny. But it was interesting because I did see these final episodes out of order. And there's kind of a lesson in that, in which you could have actually started with that 3rd episode. I believe it's called Skeletons, and not have done the previous 2. But the benefit of a TV series is you have all this extra time for just character development, when there's no fights going. So it was interesting to start with episode 3, see the excitement of it, but then go back and watch the first 2 so I could catch up. Tell us about what your goal was for the first 2, because you're ending the previous series of episodes with the death of Quan. Somebody, dies by accident during a huge scuffle, and you do need a reset. And it really ripples through all the characters, even though none of them knew Quan. They just knew that things were getting out of control to the point that a kid has now died for a competition, which is not right.
Yeah, well, I mean, regardless of whether or not, you were experiencing episode 11 in real time, which meant that there was this big gap between the release pattern of episode 10 and episode 11, or if you're watching it, now, and it's, you can just hit play right after episode, 10 and begin episode 11. We wanted to have that, impact of Quan's death felt in a grounded, believable, real way, and not just go, yeah, yada, 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 we're back to karate. And it was important for that to be felt at a character level for, particularly you're feeling Daniel and Johnny and Silver's attitudes about karate and the Sekai Taikai and what it means going forward. And you have this kind of push and pull of who wants, this to go back on, and why you might not want this to continue anymore, and what is the legacy of martial arts and karate around the world now that this has happened. And, we wanted to explore all of those character dynamics, because I don't believe that episode 13 can hit in the way it hits, unless you go through, 11 and 12. On a premiere night when you want to show your biggest spectacle, we made light of the fact of like, yeah, there's, the Sketsukai is back, and there's a baby, and here's more karate. But, to get to that place, you need that wind up. You need to turn the karate machine back on. You need to feel the steam start to, chug along as this thing is really picking up momentum, and get to that place where we understand what's at stake from a personal standpoint. And if we actually agree to continue continue this thing that now, we've seen the teeth, that are possible to be bared. Do we want to intentionally open that door once again? Because there's only a thin sliver of light that we're trying to get through. And if we don't, we're going to end up, up against the glass in a worse way than we are now. So it was important for us for those episodes to start the slow wind down of the series and some of the character arcs and, and storylines that are in process in terms of seeing the binary brothers start to, feel like they're having one last ride, feeling the culmination of, Johnny and Carmen's, relationship hitting that place of, ultimate happiness of, a marriage and baby and family unit, feeling the Tori and Sam relationship come to this kind of quiet place. And you have to clear out everything else to be able to do that. So that stuff's not competing against giant fireworks and explosions, and boats.
And we will get to that for sure. And interestingly, that was the only thing that I noticed in that episode because it was just, the competition's back on. But it's like, Kreese is going around being really nice to everybody. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Something must have happened in those previous episodes. Like, what is going on with him? And I guess that's an interesting place to start because in the previous two episodes, it is the beginning of the kind of Kreese apology tour. Him realizing the error of his ways and how drunk he was with power and that life is more than that. And maybe it's the fact that he almost, got killed and it was Johnny that saved Kreese. And that's kind of what brought him to that realization. So tell us about that arc that you built in for Kreese in which, this bad guy who we've seen traces of good in the previous seasons for sure. He went quite dark and now he's realized it's gone too far and he's going to start plugging some of the holes himself.
Yeah, well, with Kreese, we're thinking about his redemption and we're thinking about Johnny's redemption. It's interesting. It starts with Johnny's redemption and we know that he needs to come to terms with Kreese. But in order to do that, Kreese needs to kind of come halfway. And knowing that it was going to end in an amazing place of them being as close as they've ever been, we wanted to start as far away as they've ever been. And that's why at the end of season 5, we purposely made it where Kreese is really upset at Johnny for teaming up with Daniel and kind of leaving him in this cage so that once he escapes at the end, starting in season 6, he's as angry at his former student as he's ever been. And the point of the Master Kim character was just channeling his rage and singling out Johnny as this thing that he recognizes as a weakness. Like he does have a soft spot for Johnny. And if he's going to be true Cobra Kai, he's got to just kill that and be willing to destroy Johnny's life via the Saikai Taikai and taking on his team and reclaiming Cobra Kai, because this was his thing. We always treat it like it's the family business, that Rupert Murdoch guy that's just no, I created this. This is mine. And the most no mercy he's ever been. The death of Quan and, Johnny coming in to, kind of stop Silver from taking a final blow, takes him aback. And then also being back in Master Kim's dojo and seeing just how intense he is. And basically it's encouraging him to really hurt or kill some other kid as a result of this, that he finally has his Darth Vader, twist turn moment. But, at the same time in our show, it's more of a human drama. And so you're going through a little bit of the apology tour, but apologies don't really mean anything. He has to do it with actions. And that action is giving the family business to Johnny, who at the beginning of this season, we purposely made it where he could take that family business back. Stingray offers him, this idea of you should be in charge of Cobra Kai. And Johnny's I hate the family business. I don't because of his issues with Kreese. And so both of the journeys that they've been on kind of lead to that moment where Kreese is finally able to let go of Cobra Kai, recognize that it could be better with Johnny, and Johnny being okay, you know what? I'm willing to keep the brand, my dad's brand, my karate dad's brand.
It makes sense. And, speaking of the brand and the family business, in those previous two episodes, when I went back and watched them, it was interesting to see, the demise of Master Kim, in which his granddaughter, is instructed to kill Kreese. That was what it was going to take. And she comes after him because she decides after, as you said, seeing these kids turned into human punching bags that, they're fighting the wrong fight. And, she could run the dojo better than her grandfather. I thought that was interesting. At what point in in your path did you realize that she was going to have to kill her grandfather?
First of all, we love Alicia. She's such a great actress. And we love the relationship between young Kreese and young Kim Dae-yoon that, we've built on the show early on. So yeah, before season 6, that was something that we were planning, that path for her character. And the thing that we were trying to achieve with it was, I remember in that episode, there being that moment, there's the scene between Kreese and her where we talk about it as like a scene like in a mob movie where both people in the scene know that he knows that she's basically going to be tasked to kill him. He's telling her it's okay if you kill me. And that was sort of like the thought there. And she's looking back to her life and realizing like Kreese was actually like a positive figure in her life since childhood and is giving actually like selfless positive advice in this moment, whereas her grandfather is making her do something disturbing and horrible right now. So that was sort of a choice that we wanted her to have. And we have that whole misdirect as to we think that she's going to kill Kreese, but she's actually going to kill her grandfather. But then he catches her. And the moment that we loved at the end of it was when she does the move correctly and kills him. His final word is perfect. Like, in our minds, Master Kim got what he wanted as well. This whole time he's saying, like, in order to be strong enough to take over this dojo, like, you have to take it by force from me. And, like, you have to do that. So she passed the final test by defeating him. We just thought it was a great triumphant moment for Kim Dae-yoon after the abuse that we saw that she had, like Johnny had with Kreese. She learned some amazing things through this abusive figure in her life. Now comes out the other side clean of it and has her own path with this dojo.
I thought it was really great. And him saying perfect right as he dies, like complimenting the move that kills him, I thought was just excellent. And, you were doing other things in those first 2 episodes as well that you had seeded long ago. I couldn't figure out what you were doing earlier on when one of Johnny's, teammates winds up being a preacher. And I was like, where are we going with the preacher teammate? Now, did you know all the way back then that he was going to officiate Johnny's wedding?
No, I mean,
because that was a nice payoff.
Yeah, I think we just, when we were bringing those guys back in season 2, we wanted them to each have a point of view about Kreese and about the past. Given that we were bringing in 3 guys in one episode, we weren't going to have the ability to tell the most complex, one episode story with all 3 of them. We just wanted to know what their landing was. And with Bobby, it felt kind of right that he kind of turned in this direction and gave him the ability to speak from a, mildly religious place about the past. And then that just gave us more juice going forward when Johnny, got into rough times and needed somebody to talk to in a previous season. And when you come down to the final moments, you go, oh, well, who's going to officiate? And it just makes sense.
All the fighting was great. The show had a satisfying conclusion. Everybody loved it. But for me, the pinnacle that it reached was the scene between Johnny and Kreese and just the dialogue of Johnny saying, you have no idea what those years were like. I trusted no one because of you, to Kreese. And the acting that Zabka pulled off, like, I didn't know he had it in him, to be honest. And it makes sense to, like, in the 6th season, after, really honing his chops again as an actor for the first time in many years. He's been doing small things ever since the original film, of course, but like really honing his chops. I think he's maybe on a short list of like a supporting Emmy possibility for that scene alone, because it felt so natural, so heartfelt. And I know it's a long shot because genre shows, especially, comedic and fighting, like they're generally ignored. But like, I thought his acting was pure. I thought that scene was just excellent. What could you tell us about crafting that just awesome scene of reconciliation between the two?
Well, that was something that we've been talking about for many years. So like, I'll just say in general, I look at that scene as something that's like a kind of play that we coaches kind of crafted and had waited for the right moment to unleash. And then he executed in the absolute most perfect way. It's so real. I bring up like the family business with, Kreese and all that. We always like take this karate drama and, apply it to like real life. And really that's just a scene of a kid who was abused by his dad confronting it. And so it has all the gravitas of that. The difference between just any scene like that and what we shot is we have this footage from 1984. We've been on this journey. It's the exact same two actors. You've never seen, a 40-year kind of journey where now you're seeing these two characters and they're going at it in a way where you're really believing it, and it's hitting you more viscerally than, as great as every other actor is, they don't have that backdrop. But despite that backdrop, I mean, like Zabka just all of a sudden was one with the character. And we felt it on the set. We felt it in the editing room. We still feel it watching it now that, he's got the headband on. He's in a karate gi. And it feels like this little kid in him that's crying out. And you feel that all the more because you remember what he looked like as a teenager. And it's just, we all evolved on this show. We evolved as directors. The show forced us to do things. But when it comes to Emmys, it's not just an amazing dramatic performance. This is a guy who also does a kip up in the final scene. He has to carry a lot of kind of edgy comedy and romance. And he checks so many boxes that combined with that Emmy Award winning scene, it should be an Emmy Award winning scene. And when you can just consider everything else that he brings to the table as an actor, what he does physically, emotionally, and the comedy wise, he really does deserve it. And, it's tricky, like you said, it's genre, it's a show that's been on, 6 years. We have 2 stars in, Ralph Macchio and him. But we just hope that people give him the credit that he deserves. I mean, especially if you're an actor, also his story as an actor, I mean, Ralph as well, is amazing when you consider getting stereotyped or typecast, I should say, as this just jerk bully from the 80s movies and known as that. And this show has been able to show that he could do so many other things. It's a great story. And we hope that, he deserves the real life trophy.
To your point, Jeff, like if Emmy voters actually watched the show, and I think that that's the thing, this is a show that the world watches. And I think there's a segment of Emmy voters that watch it. We did have Emmy nominations before, but I do think like if people actually watched this performance this season, especially these final 5 episodes, like there would be no question that he would get nominated. I just don't know if people are going to watch it.
It's really just a high point. I mean, like I honestly, I told my friend, I just didn't think he had it in him, not in any way, shape or form as a dig against him. Like, I think he was firing on all cylinders every season of this show. He is the longest redemption story, right? Because, starting from season 1. And so it was very satisfying. It was very emotional and it worked. Back to Crease for a second. Yes, you guys did pick the absolute perfect thing to show in front of a crowd of 525 people at the Egyptian Theater because, we have Silver who's admitted, that he's dying of cancer, which I picked up on, even though I hadn't seen those episodes. He was dying of something. And, he wants to now intimidate Johnny's family. And Kreese sees that, he doesn't hear it, but he sees a conversation between them. And, Silver on his yacht is telling Dennis, his henchman, to go intimidate them and tell them that there's more to lose here if Cobra Kai wins. And it's just funny, like, you're like, oh, okay, that's where we're going for these next couple episodes. And then Dennis's body tumbles down the stairs dead. And then he goes upstairs and there's Kreese having a cigar on the top of the yacht and, looking at the Santa Monica Bay. And it was just like, it was so comic booky, but like in the best ways. It was so pulp. Like that's the way that I described it to a friend. It was so pulp and over the top, but in a way that like is totally justified, totally believable in this universe. Talk about crafting this crazy scene that literally culminates with a fight between them two. And, of course, kids, if you're looking to store gasoline on the top of your yacht, horrible idea, especially if the cap is loosely applied. But nonetheless, it spills and he throws his cigar and Silver yells, no. And then Kreese yells mercy and then it explodes, killing them both. So I want to hear that unpacked and when the idea first came to you guys of ending both their lives yelling no mercy together.
Okay, first of all, we knew for a while now that we wanted there to be a final fight between Kreese and Silver. And we also knew that we wanted not only that apology scenes from Kreese to Johnny that we just talked about, but we wanted Kreese to selflessly defend Johnny, that he's not asking for anything more, that he knows that that he's doing this thing because it's the right thing to do and to protect his son. And also we've built this long history between Kreese and Silver, where we saw them meet in Vietnam and all that stuff. So we've done so much. This was the culmination that we were going to have. Before season 6, the three of us are talking about ideas, and we came up with the idea of this final fight being on a yacht and exploding. And we talked about this every season before the show. We pitched the season to our partners at Sony and Netflix. And every season without fail, it's been like, they love it. It's all good. And there's not really any notes. And in that meeting, we pitched this thing, we get through this whole thing, and we get to the yacht exploding. And there's an element of like, okay, well, we'll see about the yacht exploding thing, because they all know, they're thinking about the budget and the production side.
Right.
We're like, well, the yacht's going to explode. We all know that. So we all know that's a given. And we just like never went off of that throughout the whole season. I think they all assumed that eventually we would be talked down from it, because we're making creative decisions nonstop to make the show cheaper. Our eyes are way bigger than our budget. Like, we're really proud of the show, but it's not nearly as good as it could have been. Like, if we actually had like just a little bit more money, the show was way better than it is. So it's like, it's one of those things that we're constantly fighting for every last dollar. But in terms from you talked about the pulpiness and the craziness of it, is what we love about the show is that we blended the tones from the Karate Kid original source material. That there's the heartfelt material of the Daniel and Miyagi and the big tournament feel that you had in those final moments. But in the original trilogy, there's also Terry Silver. And there's the third movie, which had this like larger than life kind of craziness going on there with this billionaire who's willing to like basically torment and potentially kill a teenage karate fighter for stupid, crazy, like insane reasons. So like all of that is canon, and all of that needed to be represented in the show of Cobra Kai. Terry Silver in the show, we grounded him. We did all the things that you would to do that. But you also wanted to see Terry Silver be Terry Silver. He's led us to certain places that are, you know, a little bit bigger than where you've been in the past. So when we were crafting that, we wanted it to be a moment where Kreese is giving himself up for Johnny. We made that the final moment of 614 because we wanted, by the time you got to the finale, that final episode of the show, that pulp crazy element of the series that popped up every once in a while in the final few seasons was in the rear view. And that's it. And that was, we went out in spectacular fashion with that. And now we do a character journey in that final episode in the big triumphant sports movie for Johnny Lawrence.
That makes sense. I mean, like, look, and sometimes it pushes just on the edge of jumping the shark. Like, I will admit, when I rewatched those first 2 episodes, the AI VR subplot of training Robbie with an algorithm to defeat Axel, it was hokey, but it was hokey in the sense that it reminds you, yeah, this isn't just about these old men. They're supposed to be teenagers, and teenagers do absolutely absurd, silly things. And I would categorize it as cute, which is just fine. It was just enough. Any more of it would have been too much. But like, it was good that you were getting into pulp like that. And you're right. From that moment forward, after the yacht explosion, which was digital, again, please, no one think that a real yacht was exploded. That would be just too much money. Speaking of money, what did your budget end up as? Like, what could you tell us of what it was from season 1 to season 6? And if you could use real numbers, that'd be great. If you don't want to use real numbers, tell us a percentage that you think it increased, because as TV shows go on season to season, they do increase in budget because they increase in popularity.
I don't know. Legitimately, I do not know, except to say it's almost nothing. We started off at a budget that almost couldn't support the show in season 1. You know, we were on YouTube Red, right, and we had a pattern budget that matched what you would expect a 22-minute comedy to be that was shot all on stage.
I would just say also, like, on the low end of the range of what a half-hour comedy would be in 2017.
In 2017. And, you know, as our series evolved, obviously, you know, there was more room brought into the budget, primarily and almost strictly for the cast. You know, as the cast expanded, as the cast, you know, became legacy and, you know, their salaries increased, the above the line expenditures on cast did increase, you know, considerably. But our physical production budget, in terms of, you know, what we actually have budgeted for construction, locations, went up maybe 5% a year for union increases, and actually ended up below water because of inflation. It actually didn't increase enough to compete with how much it actually cost to rent a truck to make a show. So we were always a scrappy show from the earliest days on YouTube to the later days on Netflix. That's not to say, you know, the actors weren't taken care of and, you know, and people, you know, weren't compensated appropriately. But in terms of your ability to go out and shoot, it wasn't a, hey, take all the time you need and you need a crane crane? Yeah, go get a techno crane. Like we were fighting and begging and pleading for things, for the bells and whistles that would help us.
First season, we got a bigger budget than seasons 2 and 3 because the way they set up a show, like you kind of get a little bit more money for your pilot, like first episode.
Right.
And so whatever it was in season 1, I don't know. Let's just say it was like 5 million for episode 1 and 3 million for each episode afterwards. And you take that, like I'm throwing out numbers there.
John shaking
like,
his head.
That's way more than it was. So it's like throwing out those numbers is insane.
I'm giving you a sense of like you have more in the first episode than you have the rest, and you take that extra whatever it is, 1 million, 2 million that you have to shoot the first episode. We just would like spread it throughout, you know. And the second season, you don't have that like pilot enhancement money. So actually, like the second season, we had like some chunk, like 5% less budget than we had our first season. And it wasn't until like Netflix came in that we got, you know, an increase, one, because the actors now were more famous for the show, so they got stuff. And eventually, like Josh said, like we got like an extra day per episode, but it ended up, you know, coinciding with inflation from like 7 years that didn't match. So
How many days would you say an episode was shot in?
The last season, it was like 7 for most, but 6 for some.
It was 6 to 6.5. Yeah.
That's great. I mean, look, you put your money on the screen, talent deserves it, crew deserves it, and then you're right. You have this problem about physical resources. And of course, a pilot needs the extra money because it is literally building the world with construction, the sets, and the places the characters inhabit. And that's what they do in TV. They want you to reuse those sets as much as possible because they don't want to go to either a new location or build a new set. So you guys really pulled it off because you were able to make it a character-based narrative. Very few people would talk about the sets. Although I will say, Silver's Mansion for that big fight that they had, I thought that was done pretty well as well.
I'll just say that itself is a compromise because when we envisioned that, it was always like Silver lives on the top of the hill overlooking the valley, you know, like being on Mulholland, and we had always planned it that way so that the chosen Silver fight would be like this epic fight for the soul of the valley with all the twinkly lights down below. So it's just like every season there's something, even with the boat, like that was supposed to be at night.
Of course, if it was at night, you would need more lights on a boat, and you were on a physical boat, but by shooting it in the day, it's easier and faster to shoot.
Well, we had no way of lighting the boat. You would have needed more boats to light that boat.
Right. I mean, that's genius, and that's great to see and hear. Ooh, hey, I'm jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine. We turned 13 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading our free issue over at backstory.net on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, Backstory. And once you've read our free issue, if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription. Of course, our current issue is our Oscar issue. You could read the screenplays of all the contenders, the nominees, and the winners, and of course, interviews with the contenders and nominees and the winners. There's so much in there, and we're always updating our magazine with new articles as time goes on, all the way up until we release our newest issue later this spring. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where you could see all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see us do the interview. It would really mean a lot to me to have you join us, so thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right back into our interview with showrunners Josh Hield, Jon Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg about the last 5 episodes as they bring the entire series of Cobra Kai on Netflix to a close. Well, you know, I want to get to Mr. Miyagi, because basically AI Miyagi comes back with the skeletons of the original movie in a dream that he has when he's kind of not sure how to coach his daughter. You know, Daniel is kind of reaching across space and time, and Miyagi's basically able to show him again that, like, yes, you could fight, but it's okay to walk away. When did that idea come about? Because again, Miyagi AI actually worked. I had no complaints. I haven't seen fans complain, and I know you did it with all the proper permissions. When did the skeleton fight come about?
That was something, you know, we knew that we were going to do this journey for Daniel in this final season, as we've discussed. We knew that we were going to have him fight against Miyagi, and then we wanted this to be the payoff that they're fighting side by side. I remember us discussing, like, you know, you hear the voices of the past, but initially it was like basically all of Daniel's villains from the Karate Kid Kid. In the very initial version of it, it was like, okay, you're going to see even like young Silver and young Kreese and young Johnny and young Barnes, and all of them were going to be there in deep fakes and stuff like that. And we don't have the money for all that stuff. But I think it ended up focusing onto what was truly important, which was to give homage to that classic fight, that first Miyagi and the skeleton fight from Karate Kid, and have this time Daniel is equipped to fight alongside Miyagi and defeat the skeletons together, as opposed to just Miyagi doing this. They're both kind of, back to back and ready there. And that's something that Ralph loved the idea and pitched to us the idea of him fighting alongside Miyagi, Pat Morita specifically in this final season. And then in terms of the idea of, the end result of it, it was really getting back to the lessons of Miyagi-Do, and the point of Miyagi-Do being that you don't need to fight. And where we were taking the characters, you have a tournament, with a bunch of characters that everybody cares about. There are fans of every single one of these characters. We're fans of every single one of these teen characters. We want them all to win. If they could all win, that's the greatest. But we had to pick and choose, okay, who's going to win in the end? And what are things that are different in each of the storylines? So for Robbie, it was he has the victory over, Miguel in the first 5. So it's like he wins that fight. But in the Seikai Taikai, he ends up getting to a place where he could win and is on a good path, and then they fight dirty against him and he injures himself, and now he's out of it, which paved the way for Miguel to have his opportunity. On the side with the girls bracket, I think we made a decision that the most fulfilling ending was for Tori to win after all that she's been through, and just seeing her fight Sam again after all these years, and just they've had so many fights that from a character standpoint, it didn't feel like, for balance for Samantha at that point, that didn't feel like, enough of a reason for Samantha to be fighting. It's something that you've seen enough. So we thought that it was finding the way for Samantha to bow out of that fight in a way where you don't think, oh, she just gave up, or, that she's just pitying Tori and therefore letting Tori have the victory. No, it's actually getting back to the heart of the lessons of Mr. Miyagi in 1984 are the reasons why she realizes, and Daniel at the same time realizes, that you don't really need to fight in this moment.
It's interesting because you want to have your cake and eat it too. You want those emotional journeys for these characters that we love. You want them to win, and you decided to divvy it up, in which you very smartly reminded the audience that the end of Rocky is a loss. And he does not win at the end of the film that launched this, amazing franchise, and he loses. And he takes inventory of the important things in his life as being the win. And you really seeded that well into the season. I thought it was very smart to not have the girls fight again. And, having Tori be able to say, welcome to the Valley, bitch, at the end of her triumphant win was great. But for Robbie, yeah, it was interesting because Johnny, his dad, is seeing again the toxicity of breaking the rules in a fight, and how, his son may never fight again. Luckily, that didn't happen. But, his knee was popped out pretty bad. And it was believable, by the way, that Robbie was actually still fine with being second best in the world. And he's not going to go on his dad's path of, self-loathing for so many years because of it. So I thought that was really interesting. But, it would bring us down to Miguel's win. Would you say Miguel's win against Axel is legit? Or did Miguel, without realizing it, win when Axel decided not to go for a spine-breaking kick as instructed, because Axel has now dealt with his own demons of realizing his wins don't really count. They're hollow because he's cheating.
I think our design with that is that it's legit, within the fighting fair constraints. I think there's a world in which Axel continues to fight dirty and leans into the dark side and, does something immoral and regrettable, and, Miguel loses. But what we didn't want to have is any impression that Axel gives up. More that Axel adjusts his fighting to feel like, I'm going to be as dangerous as I am within the boundaries of fighting clean. And on this day, Miguel is firing on all cylinders and it's all coming together. It's not like Axel is a loser. It's a moral victory for Axel as well, because you see this, this springboard for what comes next for him, which is that he's not going to be under this dark cloud of his sensei anymore. Going to take, this moment and adjust his own future. It was another color to play as we're coming down the pike, where you're waiting for what's that next dramatic twist, And it really, the twist was that, we're going to see everything that Miguel's learned over the course of 6 seasons all come together in one round of fighting to lift him up to victory.
We're going to lose Hayden in about 5 minutes, so I just want to ask a quick question for all of you, but Hayden, please start it. What would you guys say that is the most important lesson that you've learned about screenwriting for a legacy series? Because not everybody could do it. The pratfall is too much fan service, too much repetitiveness of moments that fans originally loved in movies. And I feel that people become disengaged when it's just a solid repeat. You echo and you know when to do it, but 80% of what you're doing is a whole group of new characters that had nothing to do with the original movie. Like, just because of time, they're kids, they're teens. None of these kids existed when the original movie, probably the original 3 first came out. So what were the lessons most important to you about legacy writing and knowing when to do fan service and when to do something new, which is, I think, the only way to really get people to stay engaged?
Well, I just think you need to have a new story that you're into. You're not just repeating yourself, and you have to constantly, think about an audience out there that doesn't care about the legacy or any of these memories of the past, but like of the story that you're telling right now, you're hooking them in. So, we always wrote Cobra Kai for, an audience of people that maybe doesn't know it, but you need to be told it in the beginning. You see, the fight to understand who Johnny is within the context of just, okay, he's a guy who, had his glory days in high school, lost the big match, and it's been downhill ever since. We just told a story that we were into. The interesting thing is, I would say, the whole show is fan service in a weird way. It's the problems of, other shows based on former IP are that, this is South Park's, famous episode, Member Berries, about where it's all about the nostalgia, and the nostalgia is treated as an end. We want everyone to be whereas we use nostalgia as a means a little bit more, but we're not afraid of fan service either. At the end of the day, we want to be, as fans, entertained, and we want to have the excitement of, seeing things that we remember from the past and the reward of being on a 40-year-long journey. So, we do write for the hardcore fan. If you're just writing for that fan and you're just saying hey, look, we brought Terry Silver back, we got him back. It's just you're going to have a much smaller audience. And actually, those people won't like it as much. What they want to see is Terry Silver doing something new and following that new story. And so that combination of thinking about something new while using the past for ingredients.
I totally agree. Well, okay, we're going to let you go. Hayden, have a good one. Awesome interviewing you. Congrats on sticking the landing. Jon and Josh, we're going to bring it home. At what point did you realize there was a rule that no one knew except Braun, that when you're tied, the senseis have to battle each other, and that is going to be the ultimate redemption for Johnny, in which he's going to get to go back into the ring and have a second chance? And it's not against Daniel, by the way, which I absolutely loved, because they have had their moments before. And again, shows the strength of you not just repeating things.
I think we've known for a long time that we wanted Johnny to be back on that mat. When we conceived of the Sekai Taikai, we knew that we wanted to have this tournament, have these teams, have, eventually Miguel have his final fight. But we wanted Johnny to have his final fight too. And that was important to us, and what's fun about screenwriting are the things like making a decision in season 1 where it's there's an argument over the red mats and the blue mats, and have the blue mats there for all these seasons. And then find ourselves now, we're having Johnny Lawrence fight, and we're let's bring the red mats back, because we want to see the visual of Johnny back on that red mat in the Owl Valley Sports Arena having a second chance. And that was something that we talked about for a long time. We liked the idea of it being a joint victory, though, between Johnny and Daniel. We wanted it to be something that was representative of Johnny wins as a Cobra Kai, but because he opened his mind to a different worldview, had elements of another worldview, that being rigid, and this is something about society in general, is one of the worst things about society right now is tribalism, is this element of I'm in this tribe and I'm in this tribe, so I don't think for myself. I just think, well, my tribe says this and this tribe says that, and they're bad and this. that's the worst problem that that exists in our entire world right now, it feels like. And the show has been kind of like a commentary on that underneath this crazy karate drama. So to have Johnny basically have Daniel, who he's worked through all these problems, who he hated at the beginning of the series and hated him at the beginning of the series, entrusting him to be his sensei. Johnny's entrusting Daniel to be his sensei, and Daniel truly cares about Johnny and embraces Cobra Kai, wearing a Cobra Kai gi. When Johnny needs like a Cobra Kai pump up, gives him a Cobra Kai pump up. But when he sees, okay, he got his mojo back, but now he's vulnerable at the end and he's got to like bring some Miyagi-Do in here or he's going to lose. And Johnny accepting that and realizing it and respecting it enough, that was sort of the joint victory that we had. We knew for a while that we wanted Johnny to have this victory. We knew that we wanted him to fight again. And then from there, it was really making sure that we had a worthwhile enough opponent, somebody who is like we built up over the course of the season for us to hate the way we hated Johnny and Kreese when we watched Karate Kid back in the day, and somebody who we would fear, who made Johnny the underdog in this final fight.
You had all the time in the world to set him up as a great bad guy. He's unethical. He's, as bad as Silver. You think of him as just Silver's crony for a while, but you realize that there's something dark about him as well. You pretty much said it all with saying very little. When Wolf and Johnny have a confrontation in the locker room, and Wolf gets the upper hand on Johnny and could have, hurt him pretty bad, and Johnny's very shaken, especially in his confidence, which he's been struggling with since day one of the series. When did that come about? Because it doesn't happen in front of the crowd, and the threat is very clear of him humiliating him, but doing it before the fight in a way that has him so rattled is really, it was a smart move.
Well, in constructing the character of Wolf and, who he is and how good of a fighter he is, how deadly of a fighter he is, how educated, he might be when you put him, in a buffet line with Johnny, they were all decisions that we were making to get to this place where, at the beginning of the final episode, Johnny is remembering the journey he's been on to get to this place. In the absence of this fight, he's okay. He's got a family. He's got his life pretty much together. But this fight represents both opportunity and the potential to put him in a hole emotionally. And the last time he was put in that hole, it took him 33 years to crawl out of it. He's all of a sudden having this crisis of confidence and a crisis of what does a loss mean. And, the first part of the episode is him getting over that with the help of Daniel. And then Wolf just delivers the gut punch of, wait a minute, you're not over that. Like, he basically undoes what Daniel says. Like, oh, I bet you think that like it doesn't matter, but it does. And here's why. And here's why it will haunt you for the rest of your days. And here's why, your kid will be called a loser. And it's just going to be a generational trauma. And it shakes Johnny to the core. And it reminds us that, yeah, Johnny is the older fighter. Johnny is not as crisp as he once was. And Wolf is a pretty deadly guy. And you start to see that fight get away from Johnny in the early rounds. And we wanted to make it believable that we might be going for that Rocky ending, that, is the ending going to be that Johnny loses, but Wolf was wrong and he does get over it? Or are we going for, the classic Hollywood ending, or are we subverting it another way? But we wanted to really feel the internal struggle from Johnny's perspective of what does not feeling confident about this fight mean for his future.
Yeah, I was really fascinated by something that happened in the fight. It was cool that you made it, okay, it's just 3 hits, just like the original tournament from the original movie. Like that was, a fine, nice return. I'm like, wow, this is going to be a short episode. How are you going to get around this? But you started having Wolf attack him with illegal moves that don't add points to the scoreboard. And I got to say, I was surprised, and I'm curious if there ever was any plans. I was surprised that Johnny, after all of his bad Cobra Kai days as well, didn't ever have his illegal moves as a way to start his meteoric rise back. Because interestingly, and there's nothing wrong with this, it was completely satisfying, Johnny has a completely clean fight. And I was surprised that on his way to victory, he didn't sneak in a few illegal moves to get his mojo back. Was that ever discussed? Was that ever a possibility?
That was never discussed. It was, the thought was that Johnny was going to fight a clean fight. That was the way we intended. Like his head was so scrambled from part of that fight that he didn't have the wherewithal or the ability to like pull off an illegal move, with what he was doing there. Johnny, with the exception of Kreese giving him instruction to do something illegal, his instincts weren't to do illegal things. So it didn't feel feel in character to us. So, we wanted it to be the kind of situation where the Johnny that we know now is entering this fight, ready to fight this thing. He doesn't have Kreese there saying anything that's nefarious. And it's Wolf who, on the other side of it, is doing the nefarious stuff.
It was interesting. I absolutely loved the way that he wins. Was there ever anything about a crane? Like, again, I hate to just bring it up as fan service, but I could have seen Johnny doing that to throw off Wolf. Was that ever on your drawing board? Or
no, I mean, we played the crane kick so many times in series at this point, from season 1 when Johnny had Miguel do it just to, to send a little FU to Daniel at the tournament, to Daniel using it himself against Silver in season 5, to Johnny and Daniel, doing it, in the montage lead up to this fight. So it would have felt a little schmaltzy. Like we, it has to pass the smell test for us too, when fan service intersects with bad storytelling.
Well, I mean, it was in the lead up. So like that was the only reason why I was wondering. And of course, we're not going to have time to talk about, your amazing performance for both of you when, after the victory, you're at the restaurant pitching a show that would become an alternate universe version of Cobra Kai. So maybe you're going to enter a multiverse. But how far back in the past did you have that idea of LaRusso saying, "You're all right, Lawrence," when Johnny wins, similar to the "You're all right, LaRusso" that Johnny says at the end of Karate Kid Part 1?
That was actually something that was not initially in the script, because we did question it and we worried that it was one step too far. And our editor, Zach Arnold, who has edited many of our big episodes of the show over the course of the years, reached out to me and said, "I'm making one plea, like this one thing. Can we do that? Can we have him say, 'You're all right, Lawrence,' there?" And I remember saying to him, I was like, I don't know for sure if that's one step too far, but let's film it. Let's put this in there because it may just be the right thing. Because we had been on the fence about it. We did discuss it, and then we didn't put it in the script. And then Zach, who had not been in our writer's room, his instinct was to have it because he's picturing editing the episode. And so, we threw it into the script. And on the day, we're like, we're keeping this. This will be there. This will be there. And it felt completely right.
It was perfect. Left turns are funny to hear about. What's something that you thought about for a day, a week, a month for the finale that is kind of wild for fans to hear about that was never even shot? Were you ever serious about having Johnny lose, or did you realize early on he was going to win? Okay.
No, I mean, the only thing we didn't shoot for the finale was a scene we wrote for Chad McQueen, and he couldn't come and do it because his health was failing. It was before he passed away. And that scene would become Johnny at the graveside of his mother's grave. And it had similar notes in terms of Johnny's attitude and in terms of the flashback to who Johnny was before the events of Cobra Kai began. But, we made that adjustment because we had to. I don't think there's really anything from a conceptual level for the finale that we didn't pull off. I mean, there were moments where like the boat fight in 14 was happening at the same time as the fight. We were like maybe going to have this bigger bombastic finale where there's a fight here and a fight there. But as we got closer to breaking those episodes, it felt like, let's clear that energy out to make room for this character story in the finale.
Was there ever any sense of the characters learning of the boat exploding and Kreese and Silver dying? Because we don't see that either.
No, and that it's funny because that's something that fans have brought up at times. I think that we thought the most valuable redemption for Kreese was that he did this selflessly, and that it wasn't about anyone finding out about it. When you think of the energy of that final episode, the energy of the scene where they're like, "Oh, Kreese and Silver died in a fiery yacht," thing feels like not the energy we were going for in any moment of that episode. Let's be clear, our intention is that Kreese and Silver are dead.
Right.
With that explosion, you look at that explosion, they're dead, and that's it's obvious. Unless you're living in superhero kind of, movie world or whatever it is. So that's what it was. But because we're fans ourselves and we love Kreese and we love the concept that he's a guy who faked his own death a bunch of times and there's that he always comes back. We did film, there's a moment in the final montage where you see the Sports Illustrated with Johnny and Daniel on the cover. And we actually filmed the camera panning over and you saw a magazine with Terry Silver on the cover where it was the mysterious disappearance of Terry Silver. Yeah. And then we had Marty Cove there on the day reach in, pick up the magazine, and we didn't let him wear his ring, and he wanted to do a version where he had a cigar in his hand.
And we only shot his hand.
Yeah, we only shot his hand, a hand there, so that there could be some element of, oh, so Kreese did survive that fight. Another thing we discussed at one point was after Johnny's victory, pulling deep into the crowd, and you see, Darkman style, we see a shadow of Sensei Kreese kind of bowing. So we toyed with the concept of having Kreese alive at the end, but it felt ridiculous to us. It felt inauthentic to the story. story, but we did film that one moment just to have it in case we were in the editing, because you never know. You had one chance to film this thing, so we're like, it doesn't cost any extra money for Martin Kove to stand there and put his hand in and do this thing. But we knew when filming it we weren't going to use it, and in editing you certainly knew you weren't going to use it.
There's a degree of fan reaction of like, oh, I would have, liked these guys to acknowledge that this happened or know about this, but I also kind of go, well, why? Johnny and Kreese had their final scene where Kreese bowed to him and kind of walked away, as if forever. They're not buddies where he's coming over and they're having barbecues. Nobody's friends with Silver. There's no story or emotional connection reason why, they need to know this. The important thing is we as an audience know that Kreese did this great selfless thing for Johnny.
It's actually cooler that he is dead within the universe and that it's not a faked death. And honestly, like the only person that really notices is Wolf. When Silver is not at the fight. Otherwise,
where's Silver?
Yeah. Well, otherwise it's interesting that these characters that were so overbearing on the universe slip into the background, and we really let the students themselves, young and old, take the light again now that these dark forces are gone. I mean, so I thought it was great. I thought it was great. Really briefly, do you want to tell us your toughest scene? The one that you remember wrestling the most with in the writer's room with your collaborators or on the page yourself when you were writing one of the episodes of the finale?
From a writing standpoint, I'm not sure. From a production standpoint, it was that boat scene.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yacht scene.
I mean, that was the hardest thing to shoot given the restraints. I'd say one of the toughest things to choreograph, not to conceive of, but to then bring to fruition was the brawl in episode 10. It's not one of the finale episodes, but that was something that when you're having that much action happening for that long, it has to still be page turning in the script, and it has to feel worthy of taking the time to go do that on the day, so it just doesn't feel like, well, could this have been half as long? And then obviously the putting that on its feet became its own thing.
I just say the fights in general, when you think of the back five, that's the hardest stuff. It's how do you make this fight different? How do you make it have the journey within the fight that is character based and also martial arts based, that feels different from any of the other fights that have existed on the show to this point? And certainly you're doing a bunch of final fights in this final season, so it's not like to make each one different is a real challenge. So that's the stuff that you wrestle through a lot of different incarnations of the points going back and forth, who has the lead first. That's one of the biggest challenges on the show.
Could you consider an expanded universe in the next decade, after some time passes, which is important for this show? Is that something that could be on the horizon? Or for the moment, do you consider this a done deal?
I mean, Cobra Kai as a show is over, but the Miyagi verse and these characters, the ones who live, are alive and have, there's fruit on the vine in terms of, revisiting. We have a lot of ideas in terms of, how to continue to tell stories in this universe, both contemporary stories and period pieces. And, when the time is right, I think those stories will happen. But, this is the moment to kind of take a breath and enjoy the sunsetting of the mothership.
Well, look, Jon and Josh, you were so generous with your time. I've had a blast being able to interview you guys through all these episodes. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thanks for coming down and talking about it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Thanks so much again to showrunners Josh Heald, Jon Hurwitz, and Hayden Schlossberg for being so generous with their time and talking about these last 5 episodes where they really stuck the landing, because they just rocked it, and I couldn't have been happier with it. I know the fans loved it as well. So thanks again to Josh, Jon, and Hayden for coming down one final time to talk about Cobra Kai. And of course, thanks one more time to my awesome sensei when I was young and impressionable, Jim Hartley of Bushudikan Karate, now known as Kinyukan Karate, as the tradition continues in Kansas City. And folks, if you want to experience some more great storytelling interviews, I hope you check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We turned 13 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. We have a free issue over there. You can read it at backstory.net or via our iPad app. Backstory. And if you like what you see, and I hope that you do, you could use discount coupon code SAVE5 to save $5 off a 1-year subscription of Backstory. Now, of course, our Oscar issue is our current issue, but don't worry, we're still adding new content to it all the time. But if you didn't catch up on reading all the screenplays of the contenders, the nominees, and the Oscar winners, they're still there waiting for you. So there's lots of great content continuing to be added to the magazine. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and Apple Podcasts and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, where you could watch all these Zoomcasts. That's right, you could see me do these interviews. It would really mean a lot to me to have you join us. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2025. All rights reserved. And folks, if you're looking to get a hold of me, that's pretty easy to do. You could find me on Twitter, also known as X, as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. You could also find me on Blue Sky as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. And of course, you could find me on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Do you see a trend happening here? You could also find me on my Facebook fan page just under my name, or you could write an email. That's right, an email to backstoryletters@gmail.com, and I will do my darndest to respond to you. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.